Alright, so to demonstrate basic Ruby on Rails routing, let's go ahead and create a new Ruby on Rails app that we can use to give an example of the different types of routing Ruby on Rails offers. This is just the basic routing. This doesn't go into nested routing or namespace routing. We can go into those a little bit later on another screencast. This is just the straight up vanilla routing for Ruby on Rails. So let's go ahead and look at our default routing file. So it's in the config folder. It's called routes.rb, and if we go all the way to the end of the file, you can see there that we have two basic routes that are given to us for free. The first one takes a controller, an action, and an ID, and the other takes a controller, an action, an ID, and a format. Let me go ahead and show you really quickly what this means. We're going to go ahead and generate a controller. We're going to call it site controller. We're going to have an action on it called index. So now if we start our application up here in a web server, and then we go ahead and visit it in the browser, we can see that it brought it up. And what it did is it went ahead and it called into a class called site controller, which you can access at app controllers, app controllers site controller, and you see here that it has a method on it called index. That method is typically referred to as an action. In Ruby on Rails, if you have an action, by default it renders a view. Oh, not controllers. It renders a view in the corresponding folder for the controller that is called the same name, you can see right here, called by the same name as the action. So in this case it's index. So if we go back to our routing table here real quick, our routing file, you can see that it connected to the site controller, right here, site controller, and the site action. Now if you're new to Rails, you're probably wondering what the ID is. The ID in this case is part of the mapping, and it simply maps that ID to a parameter. So let's go ahead and start up our server again here real quick. Script server. And we can see that it's still hitting that site index, but we don't see any evidence that that site is being passed through as or that ID is being passed through as a parameter. So let's go ahead and go back in, and we'll edit the view really quickly. I did it again. View site index, and we will just add a tag here that shows that our ID is being passed as a parameter, params ID, and that's the notation for gathering parameters from the URL, is that params. It puts it into a Ruby hash. So we'll go ahead and save that. We'll start up our server again, and voila, there it is right here. We can see that we have ID equals 1, and that's exactly what we passed it. So the next thing that we want to do is, what if we want just a simple path for accessing a particular route. For example, let's go ahead and create a route called Joe. And we'll map a parameter for Joe that gives him a last name. So if we do map.connect Joe, and then we say last name, and we don't want the colon here. The colon indicates that that should be passed as a parameter. And so if you think about it, the controller name and the action name are also passed as parameters and can be accessed through that params structure. So we have Joe last name, and now what we need is we need a controller with an action on it that Joe can go to, which we didn't set up here. So let's go ahead and tell Joe that we want him to use the site controller and use an action we're going to call greet. Okay? So let's go ahead and create that action on the controller. Then we'll go ahead and create a new view for that action. Greet.html.brb. And we're just going to say, hi Joe, params last name. Now, if we start up our web server and we go to our, oh, we have one right here. Oh, I guess it's not ready. Localhost 3000 Joe Smith. When we fire it up, we see, hi Joe Smith. Now if we just delete that so we don't pass it anything, there's a routing error because Joe nothing, it's expecting that last name as part of the route. So what if we just want a simple route with no parameters passed? Then what do we do? Well, in Ruby on Rails we call these named routes. Okay? So we'll go ahead and we'll create another route here. And this time we're going to call it, well, let's say that we have a login page. Okay, we just want it to go to the login page. So we tell it to go to site, or we just say login, because this is the path that we want it to follow. Controller, and we're going to put this on the site controller. You don't have to, you can put it on any controller you want. We're going to say action greet, and you can also give it other parameters. So we're going to say last name Smith. Go ahead and close this, and now if we fire up our web server again, we come over here and we go to the login page. It says hi Joe Smith. Now obviously under normal circumstances you would have some form fields here that would collect a username and password and authenticate a user, but for our example it's kind of contrived, but it keeps things simple and makes it easy to understand. Alright, the last route that we're going to show here is Restful Routes. Now Restful Routes are very nice for several reasons. One is that it keeps your application interface very, very simple. And the other nice reason is because RESTful routes are used to generate short helper methods in your views so that you can generate links to each of the different operations that it provides for you, which are the CRUD operations, and we'll show you that here. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and generate what a Rails scaffold for a post object. Okay. Now again, we're going to keep this very, very simple. I'm not going to give it any attributes or anything, but you can see that it generates a whole bunch of files. It generates the post model, it generates functional tests, it generates all of the views that it's going to need, and it's going to generate some CSS, and most importantly to our discussion, it generates a route. And you can see that it's actually in the routes file here at the top, right here, map, resources, posts. So what exactly does that do? Well, if we go ahead and we edit the newly created post controller, we can see that it provides all of these different methods. There's an index method, which is basically provides the list of all of the posts in the system. There's a show method that shows just one, a new method, which allows you to create them, an edit method, which gives you an edit page, an edit form. Create is what does the work behind creating a new post. Update takes the parameters from the edit action, and destroy. Now you can see in the comments above it that, for example, destroy says delete /posts/1. Now you should understand how this works based upon the other examples that we've given. This is just a path on the URL. Now delete, it's not something you see very often, delete, but the delete is the HTTP verb that is passed through the system into the routing table, and the routing table looks at the HTTP verb and the path and determines that it needs to come to the destroy action. This is very convenient because you cannot cross-post the delete. You can't. The browsers are not capable of sending delete verbs or put verbs. Now, Ruby on Rails has a way of getting around this, and we'll probably discuss that in another screencast. But for the most part, you can see here that if you go to this path with a typical GET request, which is just what you get when you type in a URL in your into your browser, then that's what you get back. So I'm pretty sure that this will not work because we haven't migrated the database or anything. But rather than do that, I'm going to actually show you a convenient place that lists all of these different HTTP verbs and their corresponding paths. If you go to guides.rubyonrails.org, and then you just scroll down here to controllers and you see Rails routing from outside in, you just go ahead and click this. Restful routing right here, CRUD verbs and actions. This tells you everything that is involved in this type of routing. This is convenient for APIs because you can provide XML or HTML or JSON or any other format that you want, and basically use this to provide the API or to show the HTML forms. And that's pretty much all I have. I hope this helps you in your journey to learn Ruby on Rails. Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Bravo!
I loved that.
Oh, it was great.
Well, it was pretty good.
Well, it wasn't bad.
Well, there were parts of it that weren't very good, though.
It could have been a lot better.
I didn't really like it.
It was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was awful.
It was terrible.
Get him away!
Hey, boo!
Boo!